And so definitely not last, last but not least in any way, shape, or form is my brother, brother Dominique. And so you've been doing this for a while. You've been working in the recovery field. I know you're smart as a whip, sharp, school, connected, all these different things. There's not a field that you couldn't have done, in my opinion. What called you to the recovery field?
First of all, thank you, Reverend Odom, for this opportunity. Reverend Melissa, it's a joy to be on this panel with Pastor Joseph and Pastor Williams. And I was sitting here wondering and asking, why am I here? Y'all have been marvelous and great and have shared and enriched me even. But this is something, Reverend Odom, that I realized I was called to. So in ministry, a lot of people understand being called to ministry as a call to preach. But that is just one responsibility of ministry. More important, it's a call to serve, right? And so at Virginia Union, one of the things we always talk about is producing the work your soul must have. And I was born into what I call the recovery community. And so while in my bio, it says I'm a fourth generation preacher, I have many generations of addiction and substance use in my family, right? I lost my cousin, who was one of my best friends, on July 4th, 2009, died in the house. From what I now understand from working in the field, he was trying to do his own individual detox and did not make it. And so having seen that experience, having individuals in my family that still struggle today with addiction, being born and raised in a third world community, it's easily accessible, right? And so I got a phone call one day because of my, never know where God's gonna take me. Got a phone call one day because of my resume, my experience from the University of Houston, being a dual major in health and psychology. And somebody stated that they felt that I would be good for this work. And so I'm always just been open and receptive. And so I began to listen. And as I was listening to them, God began to speak, right? And so I said, well, one, I feel a pressing and a responsibility to be an advocate and a resource and a valve for my community, if I can be personal, specifically the African American community. We are a community that experienced the most trauma, but sadly we receive the least amount of help. This is typically due to one or two reasons. Number one, we don't have the resources, don't know about it. And then number two, because of the way that we've been brought up, our pride. And so we feel that we can always self-medicate. We feel that we can always just endure because we had to endure. Because we had to go without, we become accustomed to just dealing with things in the best way we know how. And sadly, sometimes dealing with things in the best way we know how is a trigger for alcoholism and substance abuse. You got to be careful when you give a Baptist preacher a mic. Mr. Joseph and Pastor Williams, the spirit just infused out of them. But I was called to John 21 when Peter was back on the boat. This was a triggering experience. Peter had just walked with Jesus for so long and became one of his best disciples and one of his closest friends and brothers. And all of a sudden, that advocate, that person that caught him from the beginning, because Peter was a fisherman. Jesus saw something in Peter that he didn't necessarily see in himself. And so Jesus became an advocate because he brought the best out of Peter, right? So Peter, even and everybody jokes, and I have a Peter spirit too. I'm 1 foot in the church and 1 foot in the community, right? And so Peter, God used him. But when Jesus experienced Calvary and was getting ready to go, Peter went back to doing what he was doing before. So a lot of times in recovery, the challenge is being able to maintain. And so Peter was triggered. The person that he could go to, the advocate that he had, the person that kept him sane and away from those burning desires that were, let's say, mold, went away. And so now the triggers were available and he just went back to fishing. It wasn't that he didn't know that help was available. It wasn't that he didn't know that he didn't have to do this, but it was easier. And it was something that offered him relief. He was afraid to keep walking when the training was came. I'm going somewhere with this because the point is that Recovery is not a one-time deal.
Yes.
It's not a go to AA meeting, complete the steps, and now I'm good. It's an everyday, all day, year-round, lifelong journey.
Yes.
And so the beautiful thing about it is that Jesus, even though he had multiple assignments, still filled the role of an advocate. Because as Peter was fishing, he caught nothing. There's a word in that, because sometimes we slip into substance use and we're using it as a sobering moment for the pain that we feel. And so we try to crowd out the pain by taking substances or drinking alcohol or whatever we label it as, but we catch nothing. We don't get better, we actually get worse. But thank God that he's an advocate, because he was on the shore, and before he fed him, he said, put your net on the other side. So he reminded Peter that though you're a fisher, right, there's a certain way to do it, right? So you don't have to slip into the bad habits because they relieve you for a temporary moment.
Wow, you're preaching.
See what I'm saying? So Jesus says, now that you caught that, then I realized, you know what? I was down before and you lifted me. And I'm down now and you're still here to lift me. And so for someone in recovery, the initial experience is the detox. The initial experience is the first session of IOP, and I'll talk about that in detail. The first session of PHP. The first time you go is the initial experience. But the main call for me is being an advocate to walk with you on this journey, to partner with you in recovery, because there are going to be temptations, even once you acknowledge, admit, address.
Right.
The temptation sometimes gets even harder, right? So you have to have an advocate, which is the Holy Spirit, which is Jesus Christ, which is God, right? That spiritual foundation does help. And I'm speaking of this because God told me to talk about it, because people push away from AA. And I love the work that I know you've talked about. You're going to go into more detail, but I think it's a necessary work, because in mental health, as well as behavioral health and substance use disorder, advocacy is so important. And the beautiful thing about the story is Jesus brought them back to shore, and he now had a way to connect with Jesus to help him with his trigger, right? And so he knew that though Jesus may not be here presently, I can talk to the Father, I can pray, I can develop some habits, I can do some things, I can have some replacement habits that help me when the craving is big, right? And so the whole point of what I'm trying to say is that advocacy is why I'm here. I have a love for my people. I have a love for the Lord, and I have a love for helping people that may not know that resources are there. And so that's how I got here, and that's why I stay here.
We'll come back to it, because so we're a little bit over, but I wanted to push it a little bit. So I'm gonna go to each one of the three of you in the panel again, and in a couple minutes talk about the challenges that we face, but how do we make the church safe? A couple things that you see that are critical to change within the church, whether it's with the people, it's up to you.
Absolutely. So Reverend Joseph, Pastor Joseph hit on a few things that I wanted to cover. Number one, stigmas, right? As a church body, as Christian, as believers, as a church family, I think we need to do more education on the stigma, right? Because somebody is outwardly expressive of what they struggle with doesn't make them less than. It doesn't make them different. It's just somebody that is willing to get the help that they need. And I submit that there's more people than not, like Reverend Barbara said, the church is the place for the sick. We don't come to church because we're well.
Amen.
A lot of people have that misnomer that I come here because we are thankful. We come to give God praise and worship.
Perfect, right.
So I come to church and everything's good. A lot of people go away from church when everything's good. The reason we come to church is because we have a problem. Like what Barbara said, we have to have a problem to know that Jesus can solve it.
Yes.
Right. And so in the recovery community, I feel that properly addressing stigma, and I've done podcasts and things like that before, especially in the African American community. Right. We already have the stigma of being Black. or the stigma of being a male or a female. If you add another layer that we have an addiction, that's something that most people aren't willing to do, right? But some people are addicted to social media, right? That's something that's not highly talked about. Some people are addicted to socialization. That's not something that's highly talked about, right? Some people are addicted to behaviors that are still in the closet, right? And that's not something that's highly talked about. And so this community addresses some of the mental health challenges that they face, and it should not be persecuted. And so I believe education in the church, awareness in the church regarding mental health as a whole, like Reverend Dr. Mark stated, is paramount and imperative. And then I'm very protective of the church because I mean, y'all know that there are vultures, right? Some people look at the church as a corporation. Some people look at the church as an opportunity, as a pool of opportunity for their needs. But this is a spiritual organism which serves the community for spiritual needs, right? And so I'm very careful in observing and discerning the true heart of the people that seek to work in the church.
Yeah, so that was a follow-up question. So I wanted you to, so you and I have had conversation. First of all, I gotta call you. We've been doing this for about a year, and we had a clergy meeting, and everybody stood up and said, you know, what ministries they were involved in and what they were doing. And so I said, you know, social justice ministry leader, but I lead the recovery ministry, and I was talking about what we were doing. And he called me that night. He was like, man, I thought y'all were doing like cancer recovery. I didn't know you were working in recovery. And so in our conversations, you said to me directly that you have been protective of Wheeler, and that you did not, people were asking about, you know, treatment centers, substance abuse centers. They were wanting to come and us be clients, essentially, and that you've been protective of Wheeler. Why?
So like I was saying, in this community, a lot of people have sought to get to this church in particular because of the volume that this church has, right? So there's an assumption that there's a lot of opportunity for me, right? And I've only been interested in people that see opportunity for helping those, right? So a lot of people want to put the triangle on their website, they want to put it on their shirt, on their in the community, and say, yes, I work with you. I mean, it's no secret to be associated with Wheeler is magnifying for anybody, regardless of your aim, right? And so I've been responsible in the sense that I don't want to bring just anybody here who doesn't have the right spirit. Like I said, this is a spiritual organism, and so we're not just a operation or a 501c3. We operate in faith, right? And so if you don't have the foundation, and we have people here who are coming looking for a foundation, I want to introduce you to other spirits. Amen. Right? Because there are other programs that are polar opposite of AA. There are other offerings that they do that are aspiritual, right? And so I don't want to introduce that to the church and hurt the integrity. But I do think there's a need and feel, that's why I'm here today, for this church in particular and the church as a whole to address, redress, and serve this need. We do. So that's why I'm grateful that we're here today. That's why I did everything I could to get back, because I wanted to be here, because this is part of the work that my soul must have.